1. Nintendo releases Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow on the Switch Online Game Boy app. 2. They add online trading and battle features just like when they came to the 3DS Virtual Console. 3. The already confirmed Pokemon Stadium comes out on the Nintendo 64 Switch Online app. And finally, number 4, make it so Pokemon from your Red, Blue, or Yellow Switch save file can be transferred into Pokemon Stadium, just like how the original games on N64 used the Game Boy Transfer Pak. It really is that simple. And the best part? There's some evidence piling up that suggests this might be happening very soon. Let's talk about it. We all know by now that Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games are available via Nintendo Switch Online. But because the service is still a new release, the game libraries for both consoles are fairly small, at least for now. Many more titles have been announced for the future, but fans will notice that an important series, maybe the most important series, is unfortunately missing from the lineup. In the trailer, no Pokemon games were announced, aside from the trading card spin-off coming to the Game Boy app post-launch. While it's no doubt sad that we didn't get any confirmation during this direct, we need to remember, this was never when it was going to be announced in the first place. When it comes to announcements, Pokemon will almost always do their own thing, separate from Nintendo. And usually, any big Poke announcements are saved for a Pokemon Presents, which is pretty much their version of a Nintendo Direct. And guess what? The next Pokemon Presents? That's gonna be held in just a few days from now. Or at least, that's what history suggests. The Pokemon Company almost always holds a live Pokemon Presents on February 27th, or in other words, Pokemon Day. The date celebrating the release of the original red and green versions in Japan. If the Pokemon Game Boy games are ever going to come to Switch, this is when we will see the announcement. First of all, it's the day that commemorates these very same games, February 27th, 27 years ago. And especially now that the groundwork for Game Boy and GBA games on Nintendo Switch is already there, it seems like a complete no-brainer. But this isn't just me hopelessly wishing for an announcement on Pokemon Day. There's actually even more evidence in favor of these classic Pokemon re-releases, the newly developing Japanese trailer situation. For those that don't know, there's a small hidden detail in one of Nintendo's Japanese trailers that might suggest we're getting the Game Boy Pokemon games soon. And not only that, but also the Transfer Pak features in Pokemon Stadium that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Here's the newest Japanese trailer for Nintendo Switch Online plus Expansion Pack. And here's the trailer from last year's Nintendo Direct that announced Pokemon Stadium coming to the service. In the old one, we can see a little disclaimer in the fine print at the bottom that broke everyone's heart when it was first discovered. Pokemon cannot be transferred to these games, straight up deconfirming any sort of connectivity between this release of Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 and any future releases of the classic Game Boy Pokemon titles that they once connected with. But if we look at the newer Japanese one, which came out just a few weeks ago, we can see here no disclaimer. Does this mean that Nintendo has backtracked on their plans and now intends to add the Game Boy games and make them compatible with Stadium? Personally, I don't put too much stock into this theory. It's like a 2-second clip of Stadium that just flashes by. Is a disclaimer really even necessary in that case? But interestingly, the segment of the trailer going over multiplayer features just a few seconds before the Stadium bit does have a disclaimer. So you could argue from that the Pokemon disclaimer has been intentionally removed. If we are in fact getting the Game Boy games and Transfer Pak functionality with Pokemon Stadium, let's talk about the implications. I don't know about you, but I'm part of the demographic that this kind of thing really appeals to. As many of us who grew up in the 90s know, seeing your beloved Game Boy Pokemon, who are by your side through all 8 badges and the Pokemon League, load up in full 3D to face a new set of challenges in Stadium is a magical experience. One that's unfortunately growing less and less accessible with time. Seeing my Pokemon on the big screen and finding all the little Easter eggs that appear when the Transfer Pak is connected was one of the major joys of my young life. Sure, it might not have the same effect now that our current Pokemon games are full 3D home console experiences, but still, for anyone looking to relive the original experience, or for anyone who wants to experience it for the first time today, getting your hands on all the Game Boy and N64 hardware to do so is expensive. Making the Transfer Pack available on NSO is a nice way to make this classic experience more readily available, even if it is subscription based, meaning we won't actually own the games. And who knows, maybe the connectivity doesn't have to end there, and classic Pokemon re-releases could have modern implications. Pokemon from the Game Boy games could also be compatible with Pokemon Home, and transferred to new and future Pokemon titles on Switch. For example, we don't know what kind of updates are coming to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, if any, but if home compatibility will bring a wider national deck to these games, being able to transfer certain Pokemon from the Game Boy games on NSO could be a great way to obtain some of them. And while this video focused mainly on Gen 1, since I believe those are the most likely to appear on the service first, Gens 2 and 3 could certainly appear as well. We already know that Game Boy Color games are included in the NSO package, so Crystal is an option alongside Gold and Silver. We also know that Pokemon Stadium 2 is coming in the future, so a Gen 2 update would be a natural fit down the line. And then there's Game Boy Advance, which opens the door for Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, as well as the Gen 1 remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green. This would be the first re-release for any and all of these games, and while they may not come to Switch right away, there's a chance the Pokemon Day presentation confirms some of them arriving on the GBA app at a later date. When it comes to classic Pokemon games being re-released, the opportunity has never been better than with Nintendo Switch. The current Nintendo console, the one that's in more players' hands than any other this generation, is also a handheld. The Switch may be nearing the end of its life soon, and who knows if the next console will be handheld. One like the Switch that'll be able to replicate the classic Pokemon experience. The 3DS releases were a pretty big success, and putting them out on Switch could repeat that success on an even bigger scale. Plus, if it gets more people to pay that monthly subscription, which we all know it will, that's a huge win for Nintendo.